And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is John Swab. He is the writer, director, and producer of movies such as Ida Red and Body Brokers. His latest film, Candyland, opens in select theaters and on demand on January 6th. Welcome to the show. We are so excited you're here.
Thank you both for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Mary Beth has been talking about your movie for ages, and so excited to be able to finally watch it this month and join the chorus of people that are infatuated with it. So can you let's just dive in. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Candyland and what it is about?
Yeah, so it's a movie about a young cult member who joins a gang of truck stop hookers, and people start disappearing, people start dying, and you don't know what's going on, and you're just trying to figure out. It's a comedy. That's what it is. It's a comedy wrapped up in a horror and a horror's disguise. So yeah,
it's very funny. I was laughing the entire time, very much.
Good.
But so I would love to hear kind of where the idea for Candyland kind of came from and how you got involved in the project and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the movie was pretty much just born out of resentment for the current state of movies, and specifically, I don't know. I mean, there's giant movies, and then there's indie movies, and there's kind of no in between. And there's certainly, I feel like a lot of the films nowadays have been whitewashed or very safe. And Jeremy and I got to talking, and I had this idea about a horror movie centered around lot lizards at a truck stop, and I kind of holed up over a week 2 Christmases ago and wrote the script. And my wife says it's the most of me in any script that I've ever written. So whatever that, take that for, however you will. It's a lot of fun. I mean, ironically, this movie came out or is coming out. Films like X and Pearl have come out, and there's kind of this natural push, especially in the horror genre, for strong sexuality and violence, and kind of pushing the boundary a little bit. And it's kind of cool that independently we made this, and I'm a big fan of Ty West, and that he was making something in the same, under the same umbrella at the same time. So I'm happy to see other movies like it out there. But yeah, it was really born out of resentment for the movies that we were seeing instead of the movies I wanted to see. So
well, because this movie feels like a grindhouse movie, and I feel like you take that grindhouse aesthetic, but you put it in a 2022 context so well. Because I know that exploitation and grindhouse movies are meant to push buttons, but how does that kind of translate into 2022? And I think what you accomplished with Candyland is like a shining example of that, like even more so than what we see with X. Because again, I think X could have been even more crazy, but that's neither here nor there. But and trying to balance these humanity and love and intimacy with these characters with these more exploitative, violent aspects. What was that like, kind of trying to strike that balance? I think you do it really well with Candyland.
Yeah, I mean, I just fucking went for it, really. It was like,
yeah.
it was like,
hell yeah.
It's like I've seen versions. I haven't seen a few things that we did in this movie ever in a movie before, but I've seen like the Sharon Stone shot. We kind of made that look like a Mickey Mouse thing in this, and little things like that. I was like, oh, I've seen this done before, but it was done kind of in this safe way. Let's kind of just blow the doors off of it, but also it was very important to be tasteful, and make sure that this wasn't gratuitous in any way, which is amazing to me because, when we did it and you're doing it and you're in the room and people are doing these things, you're like, this is fucking crazy. And then you kind of edit it all together and you're alone and it's just me and Jeremy in a dark room. And we're like, is this fucking nuts? Or what are people going to think? And then you start showing it to people and then seeing it with an audience of 700 in Switzerland and then a few hundred in LA a few weeks ago. You realize no, we didn't we really straddled the line, I feel like, in keeping these people as like these sympathetic human characters while also fully going there and not pulling any punches, which I'm very proud of because I haven't seen a movie like this, with the tone and kind of balancing genre. It's the kind of thing like I'm really proud of because we just went for it and I guess it fucking worked. You know what I mean? So it's cool.
Hell yeah.
Well, and I think that a lot of the sexuality and the maybe the overtopness is centered in characters and in their humanity versus some old grindhouse movies that might just be lasciviously looking at naked bodies. This one feels like it's grounded more in the characters, and I think that's what you were kind of saying too, Mary Beth, where it feels like a grindhouse, but also with some 2022 sensibilities to it. And I personally was happy that there was some queer representation in it, because we don't get to see that a whole lot. Like the character played by Owen, fantastically, by the way. I love that guy. So I mean that I love that. I'm glad that you did include a gay character or a queer character.
Multiple though, because they're also
multiple.
the two women.
Mm-hmm.
The women are, and I love that too, because like they're in a queer relationship, they still have sex with men, but it's different than their relationship. And they're again, like those nuances to sex and sexuality are like we don't see that ever in horror or in cinema, and we got that multiple times here too. So that's also like really exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just it's the world we live in. So why wouldn't you represent that, but also like, I don't know. I mean, it's just, it felt natural. I know these people. I know people that, are sex workers and all that. And most of them are queer. You know what I mean? Or to some extent, a lot of them are, so or they, are just down for whatever. So I thought that was important to be honest and, stay true to that. So,
but it feels like wild sometimes that I don't think people realize how easy it is to be honest, or they act like it's so hard to be honest with these kinds of topics, if that makes sense. I don't know. It feels sometimes people should overdo it, make it overwrought to the point where it becomes parody, and it feels more like parody than actually anything honest with the world. So it is wild to think about how that people struggle with that honesty or on especially topics like this. But
I think most people are just shit. So, so I agree, Yeah.
But Terry mentioned Owen, and we'd love to hear about the cast because you have an incredible cast here. But like we were talking to before we started recording about especially Owen Campbell and Olivia Luccardi in this film, but the whole cast is so incredible. So wanted to hear more about what it was like finding these cast members and creating this family of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, this was not a big budgeted movie at all. It was very much a labor of love, and for the most part, self-financed by people who may or may not be on this call. But this movie wouldn't have happened without our relationships and our friends. I mean, Owen, as Jeremy mentioned, we worked with before. My wife plays Sadie, so and she's friends with Eden. So there was a relationship there. I'd been friends with Eden for a while before. Jeremy knew Guinevere. We knew Brad Carter. We had been introduced to Billy Baldwin. We were fans. And then Olivia, I just had admired for a while because she's always popping up in these things and is such a strong character actor. And, we sought her out and she decided to come along. So there was a relationship pretty much with everybody in the cast. So it wasn't really a big thing for them to come out. It wasn't like we had to go track them down, but the movie wouldn't have worked without those relationships either, so.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Mary Beth mentioned Olivia, and she's having quite, well, she and both Owen too, as well, for that matter. But Olivia's having quite a year with coming off of a Soft and Quiet and then to go into this movie as well. How did she get attached to the cast? Because she's a firebird. She's fierce.
Yeah, she I think she was probably the last person we cast in the film. It was the character of Remy was a tough one. We were asking a lot of whoever was going to play that role, and like I said, everybody else in the cast was a friend of mine, or a friend of Jeremy's. So it was a phone call. And it was like, hey, this is what's going to happen, and we're going to shoot it like this, and this is how we're going to do it. And they're like, yeah, fuck it, we're friends, like, I'm down. And my wife was like, sure, I'll get naked and ride a trucker, and and whatever, we'll do it. But with we had a few people that were a little scared off by what we really wanted them to do. And I mean, Olivia, I got on the Zoom with her, and she was just like, this is fucking dope, I'm down, let's do it, like, let's go all the way. When do we start? And I was like, all right, great. So, well, you're in. So it was via her agent, who Jeremy has a relationship with, and I'm very grateful that it worked out, because she really delivered for us.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, she did. Good Lord. But kind of moving into your horror history, I would love to kind of take it back and hear how you got introduced to the horror genre.
I mean, I'm trying to think of how I got introduced to it. May sound like a douchebag, but I wasn't really ever scared of films. Films never really scared me as a kid, so I kind of wrote off the horror genre as a kid, and was more into like crime films and action movies, and that was kind of more my lane. And then once I started making movies, I really started appreciating the freedom that was allowed in the horror genre. And so that's kind of when I got into horror movies. And since then, I wouldn't say I'm an aficionado by any stretch, but I've really tried to go back and educate myself on the history of horror. And I'm glad I did. And like I've said before, and Jeremy knows this, but like, I've never felt more free making a movie as when I made Candyland, because of, like, the horror genre lets you do things that you can't get away with in another genre. You get penalized for it, but there's a freedom, and you're rewarded for that. So I guess in short, I haven't been a horror fan for very long, probably just about 10 years now.
Okay.
So I got into it late.
Do you remember like the movie as an adult that kind of started shifting maybe your perspective of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of what shifted my perspective. I mean, there's a lot. All the classics kind of shifted my perspective. I mean,
okay.
And I don't know. I guess I kind of look at real life scenarios as horror. Like I mean, I've had an extensive background of troubling circumstance and experience that were way more horrifying than a monster or a goblin or serial, with all those kind of things. So
yeah,
I don't know, like, for instance, the movie I picked for the film we're going to talk about, like, and I was between that and Larry Clark's Bully, because those were the two most scary films I saw when I was a kid, just because they were so real to me, and I had never seen films depicted like that in that raw way. So I don't know. I considered horror something different growing up, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no,
And
for
I
sure.
kind of saw horror as funny. Like, and then as I grew up, I got to see the freedom that you have when making a horror movie, and I started watching it just differently, if that makes sense. So
yeah. Oh, for sure. So so it sounds like you've always been like a big movie person, though. Have you always wanted to make movies or be involved somehow in the world of movies?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have like a family member that was really into movies, or did you kind of discover them on your own?
No, so I'm from Oklahoma. And up until maybe a week ago, it was a very closed off and kind of oppressed place, very religious. It still is very, very religious, but it's slowly kind of opening up, and people are moving here and whatever. I just moved back, actually. But I had no idea how movies were made. I had no idea where they come from. I thought they were all filmed in one day, in order, and it just happened that way. But I had an uncle who lived in Hollywood and was a film producer, or had produced one film. He worked for Jersey Films for a little while for Danny DeVito's company, as, like, I don't know what capacity. He had said he found the script for Reality Bites. I don't know if that was true or not. I'd like to think it is. But anyway, I mean, when I was a kid, he would come back to town occasionally, and I have a lot of cousins, but he really liked me, and he would take me to see movies, and he would explain movies to me, and he would tell me stories about films and about Hollywood. And he only came back on the holidays, and I really cherished that time with him. So that was kind of my attachment to film and to wanting to make movies. I'd go visit him and see California and all that. So I kind of fell in love with the idea then, and knew I always wanted to do it, but never knew how.
Mhm.
So, and one of the first movies he ever showed me was Reservoir Dogs. So that was kind of like, he had gone to the Sundance premiere, and when it came out on VHS, I was about 6 when he showed it to me. So this was a few years after it came out. That was kind of how I was introduced to movies, and not only like, just not theater popcorn movies, but like independent movies too. So,
well, let's start talking about Reservoir Dogs, since we've already kind of gotten into your story behind it, which is not at all. It made a lot of sense. But so we're talking about Reservoir Dogs. So I'll read a super brief synopsis of the film for anyone who isn't familiar. And if you aren't, please go check it out. In Reservoir Dogs, when a simple jewelry heist goes horribly wrong, the surviving criminals begin to suspect that one of them is a police informant.
So you kind of already started this a little bit, but can you tell us why this is your Scarred for Life pick? Kind of tell us the story. How did you get introduced to this? It sounds like your uncle saw it at Sundance and they brought it to you, but can you kind of dive into that whole story and why this is your Scarred for Life choice?
Yeah. So, like I had mentioned, my uncle was in the film business. He passed away about 12 years ago or 13 years ago, but he was involved. He had produced a few movies and was an avid movie buff. And so, my earliest movie experiences or most memorable ones were going to the movies with him whenever he was back in town. When I was about 6 or 7, we were at his house and he played, we watched Reservoir Dogs, and he told me the story about going to see it at Sundance and taking a piss next to William Dafoe in the bathroom before. And, just all these, like, this folklore and stuff that you would hear about. And I thought it was the coolest thing. But when we watched the movie and, Tim Roth is in the back of the car and he's bloody, and Harvey Keitel's, yelling, "You're going to be okay." And my uncle is just laughing hysterically the whole time at the movie. It was very jarring for me, because I had never seen a movie that felt real, that felt like at the time I was 6, maybe 7, and I had only been exposed to fucking Disney movies and Big and, things like that are, your typical happy Hollywood fare. And then, all of a sudden there's guys sitting in this room and they're talking about dick, 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 dick. And they're just going around and kind of this banter. I'd never seen anything shot like that, let alone people talking like that, coming from my TV. So it was eye-opening and like arresting in a way that it felt like these were, real criminals. This wasn't a movie. I didn't know if it was going to end. I didn't know how it would end. I didn't know anything. So it scarred me, I guess, ultimately in a good way, because it made me want to make movies. But I just remember feeling ill after I saw it, and while I was watching it, because I felt unsafe in a way.
Yeah.
And late now I watch the movie and I laugh like my uncle laughed, and he had seen it a few times. So having this experience while some old guy's drinking beer next to you and just laughing at all these like horrible things, like somebody getting their ear cut off or all that, it just was this super conflicted experience for me that I'll never forget. And so that's, I guess, why it scarred me for life, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. I think one of the things we've sort of seen throughout the history of this show is that a lot of times that Scarred for Life pick is that first time where maybe it's something outside of what you're typically used to seeing, or it's something that, like you said, makes you feel unsafe, or it's that kind of first moment where like, oh, this could actually be real, or this is affecting me in a way that other cinema or other media has not at that point. Did you see this before Bully? Because I know you also said that Bully was also one that was on your list.
Yeah, I saw this before, but I think Bully came out a few years after I'd even seen this.
Okay.
But I saw Bully Larry is from where I'm from, or Tulsa, and so Larry
Oh,
Clark. So there's a strong constituency of fans here, and so I remember seeing that when it came out, and that really fucked me up, because that's a pretty fucked up film in the
Larry
same.
Clark's fucked up.
Yeah, yeah, he is.
I say that with love. I mean that
Yeah.
with love.
So one of the things that you kind of brought up, there's like a little when you were talking, little things just shot at me. But the first one is the dialogue, because that was something that when I saw this movie for the first time, I probably was in my late teens or early 20s. I know I saw it after Pulp Fiction. And I remember thinking, oh, I need to watch this movie, because everyone was talking about this being his, like, first film, and kind of going out the door, testing things that he would eventually do a little bit more of in Pulp Fiction. And so I remember watching it, but I'll be honest, I had not seen it since that time. And the thing that jumped out at me now, rewatching it for the podcast, was the way the dialogue unfolds. And I did find an interview with him where Quentin was talking about how most movie characters talked about the plot too much. He said, quote, "Most of us don't talk about the plot in our lives. We talk around things. We talk about bullshit." And so when we have this opening sequence at the diner, and they're just like talking about Madonna's song lyrics, and whether that's about getting fucked by someone with a big penis or not, like this is all stuff that I was not expecting to see in a movie about like cops and robbers type situation,
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's also a really interesting quote, kind of related to that, from Tarantino about like not wanting to show the big thing, the big
Mhm.
like central thing, the heist, because, well, one, because of budgetary reasons, but two, wanted to keep it ambiguous and have the characters describing it. And like you said, the film is often about other things. So it's all about talking around it, not showing it, and not showing that big climax, like the climactic you would think in a regular kind of formatted movie. The climax of the movie is not even ever shown. And I saw this in high school because I went through a big Tarantino phase. Like, I thought I was so cool in high school, loving Quentin Tarantino. Like, I'd seen Pulp Fiction so many times, and I loved Pulp Fiction. I loved Inglourious Basterds. I loved all of his stuff. And so I watched this movie, and I didn't know anything about, like, it was his first movie. It was kind of like the introduction of all of these things. And I definitely didn't appreciate it. And it wasn't, to me, it wasn't as exciting as Pulp Fiction. And because I was a high school student, like a high schooler, and wasn't necessarily the most like media informed child, I was like, this is kind of boring. They're just talking a lot. And they talk a lot in Pulp Fiction too. So like, I don't understand where my brain was, but whatever. But I, like you were saying, Terry, they like these monologues and these conversations that seem to be about nothing are actually so fascinating. Like, I love Mr. Pink, Steve Buscemi, and a very cute young Steve Buscemi talking about tipping and not
The
tipping his
conversation about
waitress.
tipping.
Yes, but I also love that because I think the movie is such a, like, that discussion, I think, is such like interesting foreshadowing, such a foil to like valuing yourself as a person, and like what it means to be a person and earning money and to get value on yourself as a person. And he is defining like waitresses and their value, but then how is he defining his? I got really into it this time, and I was really into like it's like very deep into like the thoughts of, but it's like really love how Tarantino uses language. Well, that sounds terrible. Not all the time, but how he uses dialogue specifically in his movies to tell you about like all of these characters in such seemingly like mundane ways. I haven't watched a Tarantino movie in a long time, so I was excited.
I feel like Tarantino has become like Nirvana in a way, where it's like all the t-shirts have kind of made them uncool, but then like after a while, you listen to Nevermind or something like that, and you're like, holy shit, like this is special. And I wasn't old enough at the time to maybe appreciate it when it happened, like culturally, how those things happened. I remember both instances, obviously seeing this movie and when Nevermind came out, and it felt like a bomb went off, but I wasn't old enough to have a conversation with other people that were also experiencing the same thing. So I don't know. I think, in a way, like I looked at your list and I was like, oh wow, they've done a bunch of like cool horror movies and stuff like that. And a lot of movies that maybe I would have picked if they weren't there. But in thinking more about it, I thought this was a more interesting pick for me, even though, people think it's uncool maybe to to discuss Tarantino because it's like discussing Apple or something at this point. Like it's like but it doesn't. I can't. I mean, the guy's having made 7 movies at this point, and then going and watching a movie like this, or Pulp Fiction, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or like Inglourious Bastards. It's amazing the command that guy has, like of what he's doing. It's unbelievable. And I've read his scripts too. And I usually try and read them before I see the movie. And when you do that, and it's like, fuck, man, like it's so inspiring that somebody is that ahead of what they're doing. So I don't know. I part of me at first kind of felt like an asshole for picking this movie, and then I was like, no, fuck that. Like, this is a great fucking movie, and like, he's a genius and one of the greatest filmmakers to ever live. But I think I think that's gotten lost because every jock has a Reservoir Dogs poster in their frat house or whatever. But it's not his fault. You know what I mean?
So, right, exactly.
Yeah. And I think like Tarantino has a reputation, and I have I have my issues with Tarantino and like in some of the things he does, but I also like he also shaped me as like a movie watcher as in high school. Like right. I think and watching Reservoir Dogs now and like realizing like the impacts he has had on movie making. And I think especially because on Twitter you can be it's like hard to have a good discussion, and I think a lot of discussions about these things happen. Putting it very lightly. But I think like it is Tarantino has problems, but also he shaped what I think like modern cinema looks like today. And I think rewatching Reservoir Dogs kind of solidified in my head a lot more than it had in the past. So I think I also I've watched a lot of Tarantino more recently-ish with like a Tarantino is a bad guy kind of lens, which I don't think is always the most productive lens. And I know this about myself, that sometimes like I can have that lens when I'm watching something. But I think while that is on one hand valid, I think trying to kind of remove that lens a little bit from myself has opened me up for more appreciation for Tarantino, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have social media, and so I'm like, I haven't had it for almost a decade. So like, I'm completely like in my own world as to like most controversy or anything somebody does. I'm like,
you know what? Good. Stay away from it.
I can't exist on there, but I find out people are canceled like 4 or 5 years later. So I mean, I'm behind the 8 ball on a lot of conversations in terms of what you're talking about.
A lot of like Tarantino, it's just like a lot of like his use of like when I like slurs and race stuff in a lot of his movies. A lot of discussion is around that, and his thing with feet too, I think, is always a fascinating. But anyway, that doesn't happen here, so it's fine.
Well, John, you were talking about Nirvana and Tarantino sort of, they're cool, then they're not cool, and then maybe that you start to realize that they are cool. And I did find this article with the New Yorker, and it really it made me think, because there's a quote from Tarantino in it where he says, "I became an adjective sooner than I thought I was going to." And there's a little bit of arrogance to that, of course, but like there's also it's hitting the nail on the head, where calling something Tarantino or Tarantino-like, or using that as a descriptor for everything, it's true. And so I think that sometimes when you have made such a big cultural shift in whatever media you're doing, and then people will sometimes take that to the next extreme, and then it becomes like you're seeing all of the people all the filmmakers are trying to like ape that style, or producers are aping that style because it made such a big wave, and then it sort of becomes this sort of like self-feeding machine that turns into parody almost. But I did think that quote was really interesting, because that was made in 1994, and that's like early in his career. That's like right after this movie, pretty much. That because this came out 92, I think. And so
when was Pulp Fiction?
It was 94.
94. So it would have been So like right there, you are becoming an adjective to describe how movies are. And I think I think sometimes we don't appreciate that he came out swinging with these two films in particular that kind of shifted the way we looked at cinema in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, eventually you become demonized if you keep hitting things out of the park. And I certainly think there was such an interesting, the early 90s for film was kind of like, it was like the new Hollywood, it was like Soderbergh with Sex Lies and Videotape, Kids,
Mhm.
Reservoir Dogs. There was kind of that whole like class of people, El Mariachi, like there was kind of
Hmm.
this whole new
Mhm.
group of filmmakers that were similar to like, the movie brats, and he was certainly kind of at the head of the table. And I think, yeah, I mean, there were a ton of movies that came out after Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Hollywood just trying to imitate whatever was working, like Way of the Gun, or even resurrecting like Elmore Leonard's Out of Sight, like Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. I mean, yeah, and they none of them were that great, or stand up, when you rewatch them. So
Yeah, I mean,
I
there's
think
some movies that definitely I think do it justice. For instance, I one of my favorite movies is Go from 1999, and that movie, I don't know if either of you've ever seen it, but it apes the structure of like Pulp Fiction in particular, where it's everything's told out of order, and it's following different characters, and their lives crisscross over one night on Christmas Eve. And I don't know, that's like one of the first times that I saw a movie that I was like, oh, I see what you're doing, and you're adding something new to the table versus trying to just replicate what made Tarantino's early movies great. But
right.
I do think it's interesting though, because in the same New York article, there's another quote where he's talking about bringing the story. He's telling the story of going to Harvey Keitel's house to discuss the Reservoir Dogs script. And in quotes, how did you come to write the script? Did you live in a tough guy neighborhood growing up? Was anybody in your family connected with tough guys? Keitel asked, and Tarantino said no. Well, how the hell did you come up with this? And Keitel asked, and Tarantino said, I watch movies. And I think that that's like such an interesting thing, because a lot of times the screenwriting dictum, write what you know. And maybe he doesn't know tough guys or real criminals, but he watches movies about them, and so he's taking that structure of what a crime movie is, and he deconstructs it in such a, I think it's a brilliant way of deconstructing the sort of tough guy mythology that is happening uh in cinema, particularly with like coming out of the gangster movies and coming out of like The Godfather and Scarface and all that kind of stuff that's happening. And we have this that is taking the cops and robbers story and turning it on its head in a way that only someone that understands cinema, I think, can do.
He's such a
Yeah,
nerd.
I think it's
I
cool.
love that.
Cool because like he will do things like, for instance, Reservoir Dogs. I didn't know this until maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, much longer after I'd seen the movie, 50 times. Uh it was, it's very close to the plot of a movie called City on Fire, which is a
Hmm.
an Asian film
Mm,
about a jewel heist that goes wrong, and there's
mm.
an informant in the group. I mean, it's very similar. And he does a lot of that stuff in his films where he unapologetically will reference movies directly, but
Hmm.
only a real nerd is gonna see the reference. I mean, for instance, like in Kill Bill, I think the score that he uses is ripped from like an old 70s spaghetti western movie,
It is,
directly
yeah.
from it.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Same, I forget the director's name. I've seen the movie. But I don't know. I appreciate that he does that stuff. But for a novice or somebody who doesn't know, they just think it's the coolest thing they've ever seen, when all he's doing is going back to what worked in the past and making it his own. So I appreciate that. I think it's it's very smart business model. So
I also want to talk about the performances in this movie because I love again, this is Tarantino's first movie, so this is kind of him establishing the people, like some of the people he'll work with over and over again. But I especially want to talk about Tim Roth, who is Mr. Orange,
Mm.
who is our informant, undercover man, and I've had a crush on Tim Roth since I was in high school, and this movie is part of the reason. Even though I didn't like the movie, didn't resonate me with as much, he did. Especially his performance. One, I thought he was cute, and I still think he's cute. But two, the way he's able to portray pain, and the way he portrays someone in pain, but also someone who is terrified and someone who is able to laugh at some points. And I think there's power to the way he plays that feels really real, and was something that I hadn't ever seen portrayed so realistically on film. Like it like kind of going back to what you said, John, it felt dirty. Like I shouldn't be watching it. Like this is actually somebody dying. Like this is something that I shouldn't be watching, and I shouldn't, like, this is private. And I think Tim Roth does it so fucking well in this movie. And especially his relationship with Harvey Keitel as well, that there's an intimacy, I think, with these male characters. It's really interesting in these performances.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that for me, I mean, was the most, even more than the ear getting cut off, but the takeaway scene for me, or the one that really, I guess, to use a pun, scarred me for life, was that scene in the back of the car when he's, riding in pain. I mean, it's it really fucked me up, and in his performance, he in the movie, he's my he and Chris Penn are my favorite. I love Chris Penn. And sad that he died so young, but I just, anytime I saw him pop up in a movie, I always appreciated it, and I liked. But Tim Roth, I think, is my favorite performance in the film.
What I love about that sequence, though, too, is so we have this opening establishing with, like, in the diner, they're all talking about Madonna and they're talking about tipping. Like, it's just a natural conversation that's playing out. And then we have the sort of like slow motion cool guy walk as they're all dressed up in suits and they're walking out of the diner, and it's like we're introducing them with the actors' names across the screen, and it's all slow motion and tough guy attitude, and it cuts from that to the back of the car with Tim Roth in the backseat bleeding, and it's like such a juxtaposition of like the coolest, and then this is what happens. And so it's like all of a sudden we're away from that sort of mythology of these big ass, like big strong men, and now he is like whimpering like a kid. He thinks he's going to die. He's just bleeding. He's like, oh fuck, I'm gonna die. And we have Harvey Keitel reaching back and like trying to comfort him as much as he possibly can. And it's like such a whiplash of like tone that I think is just, it immediately pulled me in on this rewatch, and I was like, oh, I love what Tarantino's doing here with this sequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I also think this rewatch solidified how much I like Tarantino writing dialogue between like male friends, because I think there is an interesting, like I mentioned, intimacy between these characters that I think kind of tears down the wall a little bit of like the toxic masculinity kind of vibes you would see in movies like this, with like mob movies, crime movies, things like that. But here we have these, like, again, Harvey Keitel and Tim Roth, like Harvey Keitel holding his hand, holding him, saying, "You're not going to die, you're going to be fine." Tim Roth saying, "Will you hold me?" Like, there are these discussions that, you might not think it are like the typical quote unquote intimate conversations, but the way that Tarantino writes them makes them feel intimate. And I feel that way about Pulp Fiction as well, especially, when Vincent Vega and Samuel Jackson's character, his name I just totally fucking forgot, are driving in the car talking about burgers. It's just like two guys having a conversation about what feels like nothing. And I know I mentioned this before, but there's an intimacy to that you don't, having access to those kinds of conversations feels intimate. Being able to see people just talking about nothing feels so intimate. And intimate is never a word I would have used for Tarantino before, I think, until today. But there is something about that, especially in these like earlier movies. I don't think that necessarily I think he goes away a little bit from that in later films, but especially in these two that are super, super dialogue heavy, I think there is an intimacy there that I hadn't really ever prescribed to Tarantino's work before.
Yeah, I think there's a healthy amount of just like fuck you in these movies, where I think he really comes out swinging. And I think, like you're saying, maybe in a way we're ahead of their time, to the point where you didn't even really realize that they were,
Yeah.
But
yeah,
how bold they were. I mean, I agree. I think the "hold me" line, I never really thought about that like that either, but I think it's really, really great. So,
well, the thing that, again, this is probably the first time I've seen this movie since I originally saw it in like teens, early 20s. But the thing that really jumped out at me this time is a queer subtext between Mr. Orange and Mr. White, because there's a physical intimacy there too, where like Harvey Keitel's character, and I always forget which one is which. Mr. White is constantly touching him. Like there's a physical intimacy there where even when at the very end of the movie, when it's becoming apparent that, you know, he might be the informant, and Joe comes in and is like, this is the rat, and it causes a standoff. There's the sequence where he's like, literally, you can see his hands like smoothing his hair, rubbing on his body, comforting, rubbing his shoulders. Like there's a physical intimacy that you do not see in a lot of hyper masculine movies, I would say, in terms of like trying to present this sort of like very heterosexual, straight, very aggro type characters, which all these characters seem to be. But there's that tender moment where it's more than just him being betrayed because he's thinking that this is an actual cop that has betrayed them all. There's something else there that is going on behind the scenes as to why he would all of a sudden break down crying and be like, I can't believe this is happening. And it's a betrayal more so of being, having the heist go wrong than it is about almost like a romantic betrayal in a way. And I just think that's something that jumped out at me this time that I never would have ever in a million years thought of in this movie when I had seen it before.
Yeah. I mean, that relationship is very intimate, and I was thinking about it after I picked the movie the other day, and I was like, should I rewatch it to refresh myself? And I thought it'd be more interesting to not rewatch it and draw from just my memories of the movie. But now I'm just kind of replaying that sequence in my head, and it is a very interesting sequence, and very intimate,
Well, and there's what I love also, really want to talk about the flashbacks in particular, but there's one that I think fits in with this perfectly. There's the moment where we see like Mr. Orange and Mr. White crash into Quentin Tarantino's character. Again, I'm really bad with all these different color names.
I will never be able to keep them straight.
Crashes into Mr. Brown's car. Mr. Brown is dying, and it's just the two of them. And the cops are coming around the corner, and Harvey Keitel's character just opens fires on the cops. And there's this moment where Tim Roth's Mr. Orange is staring, and he could do something. It's just the two of them. It's just the two of them at this point because everyone else is dead. And he could shoot Mr. Orange or Mr. White in the back. He could just kill him right then and there and put an end to this, but he doesn't. Instead, right. He elopes with him in a way. And so it's just like there's that moment where I'm like, there is something there that is more than just a friendship. It's important to me. I found it very important that they know each other's names, and it comes up in like a casual conversation. It wasn't a slip up. Like there is that kind of, I mean, we keep saying this word, but intimacy there that I think is more so than just two robbers on a heist together. And so I appreciated that a whole lot more on this watch of going, wow, there is a very interesting deconstruction of sort of male friendships and potentially sexual relationships going on in this scene about guys chopping off people's ears. And I don't know, it made me appreciate it so much more.
That's really interesting. I'm excited to rewatch it now, and with all this discussion in mind. Yeah.
But I'm also curious about the use of flashbacks, because we see this in Pulp Fiction as well, but like particularly with that one kind of messing with the narrative structure. But what I loved about it in here, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on it, was the way that the flashbacks are sort of, it almost feels like it's not out of time. It's sort of like happening at the same time. Like he'll just cut to him and it is a flashback, but it's sort of interjecting into the story in such a way that it doesn't feel like we're going back and forth in time. It just feels like this is part of the story. I don't know if even that makes sense or not, but it just, there's a way that the way of memory and the way that time operates in this is just more than just like all of a sudden we're in the past, we're in the present, we're in the past, we're in the present, because they sort of interject with each other, particularly with Tim Roth telling the story of the made up story about being in the bathroom and running into the cops, and that sort of heist where he's like play acting it at various times. We're cutting back between those various times and also cutting back to the action that's happening right now. And it's just in such an interesting structural way that it feels like it's all happening in a linear fashion, even though it's not linear. I don't even know if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's like a propulsion to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeah, I mean, I remember, my initial viewing of it, I didn't really know what was going on. It was just this just downhill sprint to, the finish line. And it still plays for that, like that for me. I mean, I guess, when I kind of pull it apart, I mean, I understand all the flashbacks, but they're done in a way that, isn't cliche and isn't taboo. I mean, a lot of times, if you're using flashbacks in a movie, it's usually a sign of weakness or that you're trying to
Mhm.
fix something. But obviously, his whole at least with the first two movies, it's completely flips that on its head. So
Well, and I feel like they don't feel like I feel like in like flashbacks, they can feel like can take you out of the moment, out of the plot, out of kind of like you said propulsion forward, Terry. But again, these flashbacks feel like they're necessary to move everything forward. Like, yeah, obviously, like flashbacks are supposed to move narrative forward, like in theory. But when we do, like, especially in a technique in movies, it feels like, oh shit, you've taken us out of the action. But this just feels like you need it to move that action forward in a really interesting way that keeps everything together. And without it, it wouldn't have that same emotional weight. It wouldn't feel so. Yeah, Terry, basically what I'm saying is I agree with you. Um, I like the way he does that. And it reminds me of when I watched Pulp Fiction for the first time when I was way too young and was just like, who is happening where? Like it was before I understood the idea of nonlinear storytelling.
Well, I think that this sort of like is a sort of like a testing board for what he does in Pulp Fiction, but I think this one
Oh yeah.
makes a lot more narrative sense in terms of what you're talking about, Mary Beth, where it's like,
Yeah.
what's happening when there's the connection here where it's like it's all one sequence and some of it is told out of order, but it sort of plays into each other. And what I do love about it, there's the line when Tim Roth is coming up with the story and his cop friend that is giving him the big script says the story is about you and how you perceive the events went down. And that is sort of like almost the thesis to this movie, because everyone comes to the table with their own events of the story and there's arguments about, no, this is what happened, no, this is what happened. And there's even sort of like, what I do like is there's the flashback with Mr. Pink, Steve Buscemi's character, where he says, I shot my way out there, and he says that, and then we cut to him and he's running, and it's like at first you think that he's like sort of misrepresenting the truth because it looks like he is just like a scared coward just running out there with his bag of jewels, but then it turns into a shootout. But what is being shown is a little bit different than what he is saying is happening. It's a little bit more in depth. Vice, I shot my way out. Whereas we see, no, you didn't just shoot your way out. You went through here, you pulled a woman out of her car, took it, started shooting. Like there's more to the story than what is being told. And I think that is what the flashbacks do incredibly well in this movie. More so than, as you said, John, it's usually a narrative crutch, but more so than most movies that use flashbacks, this is sort of playing with your experiences, how you are representing the movie or how you're representing the events that happened, vice everyone else. And I find it, I don't know, it just really tickled my funny bone. I loved it.
Sorry. Incredible.
Sometimes things come out of my mouth and I don't even know where they came from. That's one of them.
Anyway, so do we have anything we want to hit with Reservoir Dogs before we start wrapping up and giving our ratings out of 5?
Well, I am curious, John, because it sounded as if you had seen, like up until this was a movie unlike anything that you had seen at that point. Had you ever seen stories that played with time or anything like that in a way?
No, I mean, not besides like the Never Ending Story or something like that, like, I mean, very basic, very basic storytelling. So, I mean, this left me utterly just fucking dumbfounded. And like I said, I mean, I felt like I had been assaulted, just in my understanding of movies, acting. I felt like I was watching something that really happened and then I shouldn't have been. I was, leaning forward the whole time, leaning in. So, it was my first exposure to that for sure.
Because I can't imagine, like we've had some people that have come on the show that have had wild ass choices that I can't imagine seeing as a kid. And this is one of them, not necessarily because there is moments of violence in it, but also it's a very, I don't know, adult story, an adult way of telling a story that I can't imagine being you said 7 years old, 6 or 7 when you saw it. I can't imagine being that young and experiencing this movie.
I was exposed to a lot of weird shit when I was a kid. I mean, I'd seen, by this point, I'd seen a ton of porn that I shouldn't have seen.
Oh.
And my brain was primed for just about anything weird, but again, like when it's a VHS tape and you're watching it on a TV, I don't know, when somebody tells you it's a movie and it plays like it's something you've never seen, it's different than seeing a porno magazine or the Pam and Tommy Lee tape or something, so.
Did this change how the kind of content that you seeked out afterwards, or did you go back to watching stuff that might have been made for kids?
No, I mean, I remember not long after that I saw El Topo,
Okay.
Jaworski film, and that fucking really kind of blew my mind. The cloak guy riding around the desert with like a naked baby, and then Santa Sangre was another one I watched. Holy Mountain. I mean,
Oh,
Holy
wow.
Kids. A lot of those kind of my brain, as you could probably tell with Candyland, was compromised from that, a very young age. So
Watching Larry
so,
Clark when you're in your teenager, good Lord.
yeah. I was Bully came out and I was less than a teenager. I was probably 9 or so. But
Jeez. I've never seen any of his movies.
They're a lot. They're great.
I'm upset I didn't pick Bully, man. Bully is like, I mean, a lot of people go to Kids because it was kind of the controversial movie of the time with the AIDS epidemic going on. But Bully is like, it is really, it's just got such a great cast of actors too. It's Brad Renfro, who passed away, Bijou Phillips, Michael Pitt.
Oh wow.
It's a cool cast, and it's a really fucking gnarly story. If you like horror, that's a fucking horror movie, man. So I highly recommend it. Larry's like, that's his best movie to me. After that, it kind of got a little dodgy, but I'm a big fan of that film. So.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up and give Reservoir Dogs our rating out of 5. Terry, you're up first. How many severed ears out of 5 do you give Reservoir Dogs?
Stuck in the middle with you. I wasn't sure what to think when I was going to start this movie, because again, I had not seen it. It's probably been at least 20 years since I've seen this movie, which, where does the time go? But anyway, I'm just realizing, like, shit, that was so long ago. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get watching this again for the first time since then, but it really blew me away for reasons that I was not expecting to. I loved the way that the story was unfolding. I loved the kind of character interactions, particularly with Mr. White and Mr. Orange. I don't know, it was cool to see these actors sort of that I would fall in love with over the course of the time since then, particularly like Steve Buscemi, who I'm always bringing things to 30 Rock, and I want you to be happy that I did not mention my entry point. Well, not my entry point. Whenever I think of William Baldwin, I think of 30 Rock, because he plays a character in one episode of that. And there's 30 Rock is my jumping off point, but I'm watching this and I'm watching Steve and I'm watching all these character actors, and I don't know, it made me like really happy. I have some problems with Tarantino's continued use of racial language, but I think this movie is a masterpiece. It might actually be my favorite of Tarantino's on this rewatch. I think it's a 5 severed ears. That's a lot of cutting to do, but I think that's how many it is for me. What about you, Mary Beth?
Honestly, very much the same. I think this is my favorite Tarantino movie now. It's always been hard to kind of pick because I love Inglourious Basterds and I love Pulp Fiction, but I think in rewatching this one and just seeing how Tarantino is laying out everything that is to come for him so well, and so like he's so assured even with his debut, it's incredibly impressive. I think what he's doing here is so much more complicated than I ever thought, and I think I love Tarantino like this, but this kind of movie, this kind of just it's something special, and I'm so glad I got a chance to rewatch it. So thanks, John. But then you have the final word, John. How many severed ears out of 5 do you give Reservoir Dogs?
5. I mean, the cultural impact of the movie alone, I think, is a 5. And then, I think it blows my mind. Like I said, that right out of the gate, he had that much command of what he was trying to do, and delivered on it. So 5.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well, thank you so much, John, for joining us to talk about Reservoir Dogs. I know you said you don't have social media, so I won't ask where people can find you, but what do you have that you can talk about or plug? The floor is all yours.
Well, Candyland comes out January 6th. I'm interested to hear how many severed ears that gets from everybody.
Hell yeah.
At the same time, I don't care. It's a great movie and we love it, and it's a lot of fun. And then February 3rd, we have a Grindhouse film coming out called Little Dixie. That's a lot of fun. And then there's another film called One Day as a Lion that's going to come out later in the year that we made, and getting ready to shoot another movie in the spring, and that's it, man. Just
Busy.
Hell
trying to stay
yeah.
busy. So
Amazing. Well, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Reservoir Dogs? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us more, we have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.